When I was younger, my friends and I went trick-or-treating every year. This one particular year, as we were trick-or-treating, we passed a man who stood still with a mask on, holding a lantern. As we walked past him, he turned his whole body around and followed us with his eyes. We were creeped out, but there were plenty of people around, so we made our way to the next house. My friends and I saw him over and over again, as we made our way from house to house, and he seemed to be following us in typical horror story form. We walked so slow, we couldn't figure out how he kept up with us. At one house, when we hadn't seen him for a while, we got our candy. As we turned around to walk back to the street, the masked man stood in the road waiting for us. Immediately, we knocked back on the door and told the owners of the house about it. The masked man continued walking down the street, and we didn't see him again that night. Later on, an adult friend of the family told us he saw a masked man hiding behind a tree, waving little kids over, and he only backed off when he threatened to call the police. So I was never really a big Halloween person, mostly because I grew up without many friends, and once I passed the age of 10, I couldn't use the excuse of going with my mom anymore. And it's not like I had friends to go with. So this last Halloween, I was 14 years old. I do have a little sister who's only 8, so my mom went trick-or-treating with her. My one really good friend, Steve, already had plans and I didn't want to impose, so it didn't seem like I'd be trick-or-treating this year. I felt a tiny part of me explode with happiness on the inside when my mom asked me to stay home and hand out candies. Now I felt like I had a job to do that didn't involve me trick-or-treating alone like a loser. My mom left with my sister at about 6 o'clock, about an hour after she got home from work. She told me to expect her back around 9, so I was relaxing on the couch in the living room, watching the scary movie marathon on AMC and occasionally answering the door to give candy to the kiddies. And while doing that, the kitchen phone began to ring. I remember the ringer was set so loud it actually made me jump. I picked up the phone, and the other end remained silent, except for a bit of fumbling and background noises, sounds you'd expect when somebody's holding a phone. I think I said hello about 5 times before the person on the other end hung up. I just knew it was somebody pulling a Halloween prank call on me. What else could I do but ignore it? That worked well enough for the next few minutes, watching TV, answering the phone until the phone rang again. Same unknown number coming up on the caller ID. I wanted to see where this was going, so I picked it up once more. This time I could hear a very faint breathing on the other end. "Alright, Steve, I know it's you," I said into the phone. They hung up. By this point, I didn't want to say I was scared, but I was for sure a bit uneasy. It was a long time before that phone rang again. It was getting later, darker, and the doorbell seemed to be ringing less and less. I was watching the original Friday the 13th when it happened again. The sound of that phone ringing had become sickening, as I knew who it would be, or rather, I didn't. For some reason, I gave in again and picked up, and once again, silence, other than the faint breathing and fumbling of the phone. It was like this for almost half a minute before they finally spoke in an exaggerated deep voice. "I'll be paying you a visit tonight." I had enough of this joke. I told them to fuck off and hang up the phone, promising to myself not to pick it up again. I'd say about half an hour later, out of the blue, all the power in the house was cut. The lights went out. The TV turned off. Complete darkness. I stood up, now frozen in fear, when loud and angry thumping came from the front door. I completely lost it and began screaming like a girl, but there was something coming from outside. Laughter. I recognized that laughter. I opened the door and there he was, Stephen. I shoved him nearly down the steps out of anger. "So, that was you who made those dumb phone calls?" I asked. He nodded while laughing. "I didn't sound like you on the phone. Let me hear you do that voice again," I said. "What?" He seemed confused. "I didn't say anything, you idiot. I just called and did that heavy breathing." I thought he was lying at first, but then my heart dropped. I had him follow me to the fuse box outside, just as I feared. It had been opened and all the wires had been snipped. I think we ran faster than any Olympic champions back into the house. I called my mom, who told us to stay inside and wait for the police, who she then called. The call was traced to a payphone outside of a nearby bar. I still wonder Was this just a dumb Halloween prank gone too far? Or was it a potential break-in? And God knows what else waiting to happen. I don't think I ever want to find out. It was my first Halloween living in my own house away from my parents. I live in a small corner house with a basement but no upstairs, a house my parents paid half for. It was 11 o'clock at night. I was sitting in the living room watching scary Halloween movies when I found myself getting up to answer a knock at the door. But then I stopped and thought, who could be at the door at 11 p.m.? Surely there were no more trick-or-treaters out. I had a pretty good feeling it was a late-night Halloween ding-dong ditcher, so I gave it a second. Then I shot a glance to the porch through the window. They were gone already. Yup, ding-dong ditchers. I sat back down, not thinking twice about it, and again, knocking at the front door. "Get lost," I yelled. I was not in the mood for punky kids. They ignored my demands and started pounding now, not just knocking. I was pissed now. I leaped up and swung the door open. No one was there once again. I slipped on my shoes and headed outside to begin searching the bushes for the kids, but there was nobody in sight. Not in the bushes, not behind my car, not across the street. I was done answering. I didn't want to feed into their fun anymore, so I went back inside, double-locked the door, and went to my bedroom, also locking that door, just to feel safer, I guess. Even over the TV, I could still hear the stupid kids pounding on my front door repeatedly. I was so close to calling the cops to get them away, but that would undoubtedly lead to my house being egged or TP'd. The pounding continued for an uncomfortably long time, more than half an hour. I thought these kids must be filming something for YouTube and were desperate for a reaction, but I wasn't gonna give it to them. At some point I dozed off with the TV on, only to wake up to the knocking again. I looked at the clock. It was 2 in the fucking morning. How could those kids still be at it, I thought. I turned the TV off and sat up with my ears open. For a few moments my heart completely stopped as I realized the knocking was not at my front door, but rather at my bedroom door. I jumped out of bed, looking around my room like a madman for something to use as a weapon. They knew I was awake now. They were trying the doorknob, trying to bust down the door. These weren't any kids. By some miracle I came up with an idea. It was a long shot, but it was all I could think of. I turned on the receiver to my speaker system, plugged in my iPhone, brought up the YouTube app, typed in 45 gunshot sound effect, turned on the volume and pressed play. The sound of a gunshot echoed out of the speakers. It sounded real enough. I paused the video after the first shot and yelled, "That was a warning shot. Leave now or I won't hesitate to shoot you in the head." And it worked. I heard 2 pairs of footsteps stomping over my wood floors and out the front door. I gave it a moment before opening my bedroom door and peeking outside. They were gone, but the front door was left wide open. I quickly shut it, called the police, and that's where my story ended. I was 22 years old, attending a Halloween party at my former best friend Nick's house, who died of a heroin overdose in 2013. Before his death, he would throw big Halloween parties every year at his house, as his parents routinely flew to New York every year to attend their own friend's party. He was always a big Halloween freak, so the whole house was littered with truly horrifying props that we all knew Nick spent way too much money on. He even put up giant walls of cardboard and covered them with wallpapers to create a haunted maze of sorts. I want to keep this story PG-13 rated, so I'll skip the weed, beer, LSD, and sex and get right to the part where things got bad. I'll admit, we weren't in our right minds. None of us were. Anyone who came to Nick's parties knew what went down. Me, Nick, and a few other guys, Vinny G, Joey, and Q, were upstairs in Nick's room smoking a bong when we heard 2 steady, loud bangs come from downstairs. Nick clumsily but panickingly rushed to open the door and see what was going on. There were sounds of screaming of both guys and girls. I remember quite clearly it sounded as if there were a crowd of people screaming for their lives down there. We all called Nick to come back in and shut the door. Even under the influence of drugs, we all knew what was going on. Nick ran back inside and shut the door quickly but also quietly, locking it behind him. He turned to us and had on the facial expression of someone who had just witnessed murder. "What did you see? What's going on?" we all shouted at him. He told us to hide before anything else. We all knew why. From that point on, we didn't ask questions. Nick hid the lights and hid in the closet with Joey, while I hid under the bed with Q, and Vinny G hid in the storage box. We could hear the blasting music from downstairs turn off, followed by a grown man screaming at everyone to shut up. One unfortunate girl let out a scream of shock and fear, and after another bang, silence. The man started shouting at everyone again, but personally I couldn't hear it too well, and I certainly as hell wouldn't remember exactly what he was shouting. We heard two other men shouting. By now there were a confirmed 3 intruders in the house, but there could have been more for all we knew at that point. We heard the sound of boots stomping up the stairs and then coming halfway down the hall and stopping outside the bedroom door. The intruder on the other side of the door tried the doorknob, but when he realized it was locked, he started ramming into the door with most likely his shoulder. After a few failed attempts at that, the sound of a few shots to the doorknob were clearly enough to break the lock, allowing the door to swing open. We heard cries from downstairs after the shots to the doorknob, followed by silence and gunshot. Me and Nick had our hands on our mouths to shield our breathing noises. I watched through the transparent cloth that hung from the bottom of Nick's bed as the black boots with overlapping ripping denim jeans moved instinctively to the closet. He opened the door. I could hear Nick begging for the intruder not to kill him, offering a generous amount of money if they would leave. Nick gave himself up as the house owner. That's when the intruder ordered him downstairs. The rest of us stayed put. Apparently Joey hadn't been caught with Nick. He stayed under the bed, shaking and afraid. There was near silence from downstairs, other than Nick talking with the intruders, but whatever they were saying was much too low for us to hear. It felt like a near 20 minutes before the front door slammed shut and Nick came running back upstairs to tell us that they were gone. I think the most horrifying moment of my life was when I stepped downstairs back into the living room and saw the 2 dead bodies laying lifelessly on the ground. Holes in their heads spewing out blood. Jen and Robbie. 2 good friends that I still miss. I'll spare you the details of what happened when the police arrived, but despite the fact that the house smelled like a marijuana greenhouse, the police were more interested in finding out who the masked men were that killed 2 innocent college students. Oh yeah, Nicky told the 4 of us who were hiding in his room that there were 4 intruders in total, all wearing fedoras, vendetta masks, coats and gloves. They demanded $100,000 in cash, and when Nick could not provide it, they demanded he fill their empty sack with his most valued possessions. All of the partygoers held hostage in the room were also forced to throw their wallets into the sack or they would be shot. After the incident, Nick became depressed. He started drinking too much, becoming an alcoholic. He stopped showing up to school and ultimately ended up dropping out. He started the use of heavier drugs such as meth and heroin. I had one good talk with him since the incident, and he was more real during this talk than he had ever been. He told me, with tears rolling down his cheeks and a pipe in his hand, he lived in constant pain, knowing he caused the death of 2 of his best friends. Nick died of a heroin overdose in July of 2013, not even a year after the incident.